Welcome to another exploration of the Fallout universe's darkest what-ifs. Today, we journey into an alternate timeline where Captain Roger Maxson died at Mariposa before he could spark the Brotherhood's creation, and we witness the cascade of consequences that reshaped the entire Wasteland. The confession you're about to hear comes from someone who lived through it all, who documented humanity's slow collapse in the absence of the one organization that could have guided our recovery. This is the story of the world without the Brotherhood of Steel. The lore begins now. They call me the Archivist now, though that title means nothing in a world where knowledge dies with every passing day. I'm recording this from what used to be a Vault-Tec monitoring station in the ruins of what you might have called California, speaking into a terminal that's held together with scrap metal and desperate hope. My hands are shaking as I type this, not from radiation sickness or hunger, though I've known plenty of both, but from the weight of what I'm about to tell you. You see, I was there when it could have all been different. I watched the moment pass us by, the single chance we had, and I've spent the last 40 years watching humanity tear itself apart in ways that didn't have to happen. October 23rd, 2077. Everyone knows that date, the day the world ended, but what you don't know is what happened 3 days before that, at a military installation called Mariposa. I was part of the Vault-Tec Corporate Intelligence Division, tasked with monitoring military black sites for potential technology we could acquire. We had ears everywhere, screens watching screens, and on October 20th, I listened to something that should have changed everything. Captain Roger Maxson declared his unit in full secession from the United States Army. He'd discovered what they were doing at Mariposa, the human experiments, the forced evolutionary virus, all of it. Over an unsecured channel bold as brass, he told the government he was done. He executed the scientists responsible, he took control of the base, and he waited for the response that never came. I remember his voice, crackling through the static, filled with righteous fury and absolute conviction. I remember thinking this man was either a hero or a madman, possibly both, but in my timeline, the bombs fell before his declaration could matter. In my timeline, Captain Maxson died in Mariposa along with everyone else, buried under tons of concrete and steel when a near miss collapsed half the facility. The families he'd ordered to take shelter arrived too late, caught in the open when the shockwaves hit. Elizabeth Taggarty, his friend stationed out in Appalachia, she got his final transmission, heard him declare the formation of something called a Brotherhood of Steel, and then nothing but silence. She waited for further orders, for guidance, for anything. Silence. Within 6 months, her unit disbanded, scattered to the winds, just another failed remnant of the old world. I know what you're thinking because I thought it too for years. One man's death, one military unit lost. What difference could it possibly make in a world already ending? I'll tell you what difference. I'll tell you about the wasteland that grew in the absence of the Brotherhood of Steel, about the darkness that spread unchecked, about all the ways humanity failed itself when there was no one to preserve what we'd been. The Lost Hills bunker stayed lost. That government fallout shelter Maxson would have led his people to, it sat empty and sealed for decades. When scavengers finally cracked it open in 2115, they found pre-war technology that could have rebuilt civilization, power armor prototypes, energy weapon schematics, medical technology, agricultural data, all of it. You know what they did with it? They used the metal for cookpots and bullets. They couldn't read the technical manuals, couldn't understand the computers, couldn't activate the systems. Within a year, that bunker was stripped bare, its treasures scattered across a dozen raider camps as decorations and scrap. I found one of the power armor suits years later, being used as a scarecrow in what passed for a Brahmin farm. The farmer had stuffed it with hay, painted crude eyes on the helmet, thought it was funny. When I tried to explain what it was, what it could do, he laughed at me, called me crazy, said the old world was dead and good riddance to it. I wanted to weep, but I'd run out of tears long before then. The Enclave rose from their oil rig unopposed, without the Brotherhood to check them, without paladins in power armor to stand against them. They swept through the wasteland like a plague. By 2240, they controlled everything from the coast to the Mojave. Their vision of genetic purity, their modified Phi virus, all of it implemented without resistance. I watched settlements get rounded up for testing, watched them separate the pure from the mutated, watched them create a two-tiered society where being born in the wasteland made you subhuman. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I need to know someone out there is listening, that this testimony won't just disappear into the void like everything else we've lost. The super mutants from the Master's army, they spread unchecked across the Midwest and beyond. In your world, there was a brotherhood to contain them, to fight them, to at least slow their advance. In mine, they just kept coming. Entire regions fell dark, consumed by the green tide. The unity failed, yes, but the mutants didn't disappear. They fractured into warbands, into tribes, into wandering armies that crushed everything in their path. I've seen towns where every building is sized for 10-foot-tall monsters, where human skulls decorate the walls by the thousands. The NCR, the New California Republic, they tried. God knows they tried, rising from shady sands, attempting to bring order to the chaos, building something like civilization, but without Brotherhood technology, without energy weapons and power armor and all the military might that would have come from an alliance with Maxson's followers. They hit walls they couldn't break through. Literal walls. When they encountered super mutant strongholds they couldn't siege. Raider gangs equipped with salvaged robots they couldn't disable. Territories too dangerous to even scout. By 2260, the NCR was a tenth the size it should have been, confined to a handful of settlements that could defend themselves with conventional weapons. Their rangers, their elite troops, they were brave and skilled, but bravery doesn't stop a plasma bolt, and skill doesn't help when you're outgunned by technology you can't match. I joined a group in my 20s. We called ourselves the Keepers of Knowledge, thought we were so clever. We'd find pre-war technology, try to understand it, try to preserve it. We had no training, no systematic approach, no codex of rules to guide us. We were children playing with matches in a munitions factory. I watched 3 of my friends die when they tried to activate what we thought was a water purifier. Turns out, it was an automated defense turret, still had ammunition after 2 centuries, still recognized us as targets. Technology became mythology. I've heard Wastelanders talk about the glow, that irradiated crater in California, like it's some kind of treasure vault guarded by radiation dragons. They don't know it was West Tech. They don't know what research was done there. They can't even conceive of going there to retrieve the data because the radiation would kill them in hours. In a world with the Brotherhood, scribes in power armor would have mapped it, documented it, saved what could be saved. In my world, it's just a death zone we tell scary stories about. The Institute in the Commonwealth, they rose to absolute dominance. No Brotherhood expedition to challenge them, no Pridwin floating over Boston, no paladins storming their facility. They built their synth army, they perfected their technology, and they spread across the Commonwealth like a cancer. By 2080, they'd replaced half the settlement leaders with synths. We're conducting experiments on the surface population. We're creating a nightmare state where you couldn't trust your own neighbors because they might be machines. I met a man once, a trader from the Commonwealth. He told me about the Institute, about how they'd approach settlements with offers of help, of technology, of salvation, how they'd study the people, decide who was useful, who could be harvested for parts, for data, for their sick experiments, how entire communities would vanish overnight, replaced with Institute observation posts. He escaped only because he was paranoid enough to run the moment their recruiters arrived. Most weren't so lucky. Vault-Tech's experiments, my former employer's legacy of horror, they just ran wild with no one to document them, no one to learn from them, no one to warn others. Vaults opened to release their victims into an unprepared wasteland, or stayed sealed beyond their intended time, or malfunctioned in ways that killed everyone inside. I've personally documented 42 vaults, and I know there are more I haven't found. Each one a unique hell, each one a story of suffering that taught us nothing because there was no organization dedicated to learning from them. The capital Wasteland, DC. That's where it hurt the most. James and his wife Catherine, they started Project Purity, this beautiful dream of clean water for everyone, of rebuilding civilization from the most basic necessity. They worked at the Jefferson Memorial. They made progress. They were so close. But without the Brotherhood to support them, without Elder Lions to provide security and resources, the project collapsed. Catherine died during childbirth complications that better medical care could have prevented. James fled with his infant child to Vault 101, and Project Purity sat abandoned for decades. The Enclave eventually took it over, but not to help people. They used it as a processing center for their genetic testing program. The irony of it makes me sick. A monument to hope converted into a facility for determining who deserved to live in their new world order. Liberty Prime, that magnificent giant robot in the Pentagon ruins, he's still there. Still silent, still dormant, still waiting for engineers who understand him to bring him online. Without Brotherhood scribes, without that institutional knowledge of robotics and power systems, he's just a very large paperweight. I stood in his shadow once, looked up at that metal titan, and felt the weight of all our lost potential. The Mojave Wasteland, that's where different factions clashed without the Brotherhood to balance the scales. Mr. House, in his Lucky 38, he had no Brotherhood to negotiate with, no paladins to sometimes ally with or oppose. Caesar's legions swept through without facing power-armored resistance. The NCR's forces there were overwhelmed, outmatched, unprepared. The whole region descended into warfare that makes the original Brotherhood NCR conflict look like a polite disagreement. Vertibirds fell from the sky, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all across the wasteland. Enclave pilots, military remnants, scavengers who thought they could fly pre-war aircraft, all of them dead in twisted wreckage. Without the Brotherhood's systematic approach to recovering and maintaining this technology, without trained mechanics and engineers, these magnificent machines became death traps. I've mapped crash sites from California to the capital Wasteland, each one a grave marker for our ignorance. Power armor suits scattered across the wasteland like seeds, and none of them grew into anything. I've found skeletons still trapped in fusion-powered suits, the cores dead, the wearers unable to escape what should have been their ultimate protection. I've seen raiders wearing pieces of T-45 armor, not understanding the servo motors don't work without power, using it as crude medieval plate mail. I've seen children playing in the helmet of a T-51 suit, treating humanity's pinnacle of personal armor technology like a toy. The Appalachian Brotherhood, Taggarty's Thunder, they received Maxson's transmission about the formation of the Brotherhood of Steel, and then nothing. No further guidance, no chain of command, no connection to a larger purpose. They fought the Scorched Beasts alone, they died alone, and Appalachia fell into darkness. The Scorched Plague spread beyond the mountains because there was no organized force to contain it. By 2100, you could track its progress by the dead zones, by the regions that went silent and never spoke again. The new California wasteland in 2200 looked nothing like the maps I'd seen from the old world. Where there should have been roads, there were territories. Where there should have been settlements, there were fortified compounds. Where there should have been trade routes, there were killing fields. Every community existed in isolation, terrified of everyone else, unable to trust, unable to cooperate, unable to build anything larger than themselves. I remember walking into a settlement near what used to be Sacramento. They had a pre-war laser rifle mounted on their wall like a hunting trophy. I asked them if it worked, if they knew how to maintain it. The leader laughed, said it hadn't worked in 50 years, said it was there to scare raiders. I offered to look at it, to try to repair it. They threatened to shoot me, thought I was trying to steal their prize. That's what we'd become. A species so broken we couldn't even accept help. The Master's army, after his death, they didn't just disappear like some fairy tale where the villain dies and his minions vanish. They scattered, yes, but they were still out there. Super mutants, brilliant and terrifying in their modifications, without the Brotherhood to hunt them down and eliminate the threat. Some tried to integrate, to find peace, to build their own communities. Most didn't. Most became warlords, carving out territories with strength that regular humans couldn't match. I knew a super mutant named Marcus, one of the peaceful ones. He tried to build a settlement called Broken Hills, where mutants and humans could live together. It lasted 3 years before a human militia, terrified and ignorant, burned it to the ground. Marcus survived. Barely. Last I heard, he was still trying, still believing in coexistence. I admired his faith even as I mourned his naivety. In a world with the Brotherhood, there might have been precedents for cooperation, documented cases of peaceful mutants, records that could guide policy. In my world, we had only fear. Energy weapons became more legend than reality. I've spent 40 years studying them, trying to understand them, trying to reproduce them. I have a working laser pistol, exactly one, that I've kept functional through scavenging parts from dozens of broken units. It's my most precious possession, and I guard it like a parent guards their child. In a Brotherhood world, laser weapons would be standard issue for paladins. In mine, I have the only functional energy weapon I've encountered in 5 years of searching. The followers of the apocalypse, bless them, they tried to be what the Brotherhood should have been. Nicole and her people, trying to preserve knowledge, trying to help people, trying to educate and heal and rebuild. But they're scholars, not soldiers. They're teachers, not engineers. They preserve books, which is noble, but they can't reverse engineer fusion technology. They can teach reading and basic medicine, but they can't train scribes in power armor maintenance or paladins in advanced tactics. I worked with them for a decade, taught them everything I'd learned about technology preservation. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. They didn't have the military structure to enforce their decisions, didn't have the resources to mount large expeditions, didn't have the hardware to protect what they found. When raiders attacked their library in the boneyard, the followers fought back with pipe weapons and courage. The raiders had salvaged robots. You can guess how that ended. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores that explore the paths not taken, the disasters that could have been avoided. The Midwest became a nightmare region, completely off limits to travelers. Brotherhood scouts, in another timeline, would have mapped it, categorized its dangers, established safe routes. In my timeline, we just knew that people who went into the Midwest didn't come back. Super mutant armies, Deathclaw packs, raiders with military-grade weapons they barely understood, all of it concentrated in a region the size of several states. The loss of that territory, the resources there, the pre-war installations we couldn't access, it crippled any attempt at continental organization. Technology cults sprang up like mushrooms after rain. I joined several, hoping to find actual knowledge, finding only worship. Groups that treated circuit boards like holy relics, who performed rituals to try to activate machines they didn't understand, who built entire belief systems around misunderstood technology. I met a woman who'd built a religion around a non-functional computer terminal, claimed it spoke to her in dreams, charged people to touch its blessed keyboard. When I tried to explain it just needed a new power supply, she accused me of blasphemy. The gunners, mercenaries with no moral code, they found a cache of military weapons near Fort Strong. Assault rifles, miniguns, missiles launchers, all of it. They carved out a territory in the Commonwealth that nobody could challenge because nobody else had equivalent firepower. They became warlords, then kings, then tyrants. By 2070, they controlled half of Boston, extracting tribute, enslaving populations, building an empire on bullets and blood. The Brotherhood would have shut them down in a week. We couldn't touch them. West Tech, the research facility in California, it sat there with all its secrets locked inside. The FEV data, the power armor prototypes, the advanced weapons research, all of it behind security doors that nobody could bypass. I tried 3 times to infiltrate it. Failed 3 times. The facility's automated defenses were still active, still lethal, still following protocols from a world that didn't exist anymore. In a Brotherhood timeline, scribes would have disabled the security, recovered the data, learned from it. In mine, it's a tomb we can't open. The Wasteland developed without guidance, without structure, without the framework the Brotherhood would have provided. Every settlement reinvented the wheel, rediscovered basic principles of defense and organization, made the same mistakes over and over because there was no institutional memory. I documented this in my archives, this incredible waste of human effort and life. How many people died learning that you shouldn't drink standing water? How many settlements fell to raiders because they didn't know basic defensive positions? How many communities starved because they couldn't figure out crop rotation? The Prydwen never flew. That magnificent airship, humanity's triumph over the post-war skies, it stayed a pile of scrap metal at Adams Air Force Base. The Brotherhood, in another world, would have spent years designing it, building it using recovered Enclave technology to create a mobile fortress. In my world, scavengers stripped the base for aluminum and copper, having no idea they were destroying the components of something miraculous. I stood in that hangar once, saw the remains of what could have been, saw the skeletal framework, the oxidized metal, the gutted engine parts scattered across the floor like entrails. I tried to imagine it flying, tried to picture it as the beating heart of a mobile chapter, as a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender to the Wasteland. Couldn't do it. The gap between what was and what could have been was too vast. The capital Wasteland super mutants, created by the Vault 87 FEV, they multiplied unchecked. Without Elder Lion's campaign against them, without Brotherhood paladins patrolling downtown DC, they took over completely. The mall, the monuments, all of it became super mutant territory. By 2090, you couldn't get within a mile of the Washington Monument without encountering patrols. The symbolic heart of old America, occupied by its mutated descendants. Project Purity's failure echoed through generations. James's child, the one he'd fled to Vault 101 with, they eventually left the vault in their teens, wandered the Wasteland, tried to survive, died within a year from radiation poisoning that clean water could have prevented. I found their body once, identified them from vault suit markings. They'd made it maybe 50 miles from the vault. Another casualty of our collective failure. The Enclave's genetic testing program, their modified FEV, designed to kill anyone with radiation mutations, they released it in 2078. Without the Brotherhood to stop them, without Liberty Prime to storm their stronghold, they activated their plan for purifying humanity. It killed millions, anyone who'd been born in the Wasteland, anyone with even trace radiation exposure, anyone who'd eaten mutated food or drunk dirty water, all gone in a wave of biological warfare. I survived because I'd been careful. Vault-born, raised underground, minimal exposure. I watched entire settlements die over the course of days, watched people bleed from their eyes as their DNA unraveled, watched them claw at their own skin as the virus rewrote their genetics. The Enclave called it purification. I called it genocide. Still do. The survivors? We called ourselves the remnants, banded together out of necessity rather than choice. We were too few, too scattered, too broken to rebuild anything resembling civilization. We survived, barely. In the margins, the Enclave couldn't be bothered to patrol. And we remembered. We remembered what had been lost, what had been stolen, what should have been. The Institute continued their synth experiments, their replacement program, their infiltration of surface settlements. Without Brotherhood interference, they perfected the technology. By 2085, you literally couldn't trust anyone. Your neighbor might be a synth, your spouse might be a replacement, your own children might be Institute plants. Society broke down completely under the weight of that paranoia. I met a woman who'd killed her husband because she thought he was a synth. Turned out he wasn't. She showed me his body, showed me the definitely human blood and organs, and asked me to confirm he hadn't been replaced. I couldn't. The Institute's synths were too perfect. For all I knew, I could be one and not realize it. That's the level of psychological warfare they achieved, unopposed. The Mojave War, as it came to be called, started in 2074 and never really ended. NCR forces, Legion armies, Mr. House's Securitrons, and a dozen other factions, all fighting for control of Hoover Dam and New Vegas. Without the Brotherhood to act as a balancing force, without their technological superiority to occasionally unite people against, the region descended into permanent warfare. I have reports of battles that lasted weeks, of offensives that killed thousands, of territories changing hands so frequently that maps became obsolete within months. The turning point, the moment when I realized we were truly doomed, came in 2090. I was 53 years old, had spent 3 decades documenting our decline, and I found something that broke whatever hope I had left. A Vault Tech terminal, intact and functional, in the ruins of what had been their corporate headquarters. It contained the complete records of the Vault experiments. All of them. Every sick test, every twisted variable, every deliberate cruelty inflicted on unknowing people in the name of science. I read through files that made me weep, that made me rage, that made me understand the depth of humanity's capacity for evil. And I realized that in a timeline with the Brotherhood, someone would have found this sooner, would have documented it, would have learned from it, would have used that knowledge to help Vault dwellers who eventually emerged. In my timeline, I was the first person to see these files in over a century. I was probably the only person who could even understand what they meant. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this information would die with me. There was no organization to pass it to, no institution that would preserve and use it, no chain of knowledge that stretched into the future. What would you do with knowledge that could save thousands of lives, but no way to share it effectively? Think about that. I tried, of course. I spent the next 5 years traveling from settlement to settlement, warning people about vault experiments, explaining which vaults were safe and which were death traps. Maybe 1 in 10 people believed me. The rest thought I was insane, or a liar, or a Vault Tech employee trying to lure them into traps. I saved a few lives, I think. Maybe 100 people across 5 years of constant travel and advocacy. In a Brotherhood world, this information would have saved thousands. The eastern seaboard became a war zone between the Enclave and various resistance groups. Without the Brotherhood's intervention, without their campaign to destroy Enclave leadership and assets, the conflict dragged on for decades. I have documented evidence of battles in 2080, 2090, 2100, all across the capital Wasteland and beyond. Entire regions depopulated by the fighting, reduced to radioactive craters by orbital strikes and nuclear weapons that the Enclave deployed without restraint. Technology hoarding took on a different, darker character without the Brotherhood's codex to guide it. Instead of systematic preservation for humanity's future benefit, it became pure selfishness. Warlords who controlled bunkers full of equipment they couldn't use but wouldn't share. Raiders who'd kill for a single functioning laser rifle. Settlements that would rather destroy technology than let neighbors access it. I witnessed a war between 2 communities over a cache of power armor. Neither side could operate the suits. Neither side could even properly maintain them, but both were willing to fight to the death rather than cooperate or share. The war lasted 2 years, killed over 300 people, and ended when a third party stole the armor during a pitched battle. The thief, by the way, immediately sold the suits to a trader who melted them down for scrap metal. That's what we'd become. The Sierra Madre, that legendary casino in the Mojave, it became a myth that killed people. Treasure hunters seeking its technology, its holographic security system, its vending machines that could create matter from energy. Hundreds of them ventured into that toxic cloud, following legends and rumors. None came back. In a Brotherhood timeline, a properly equipped team could have explored it safely, documented its technology, learned from it. In mine, it was just another graveyard. The big empty, the big Minmat research facility sat in its mountain crater with God knows what scientific marvels inside, its strange technologies, its experimental weapons, its scientific data that could revolutionize the wasteland. Inaccessible, unexplored, unknown. I've stood on the ridge overlooking it, looked down at the facility complex, and imagined what Brotherhood scribes could have recovered from there. Instead, it's another blank spot on the map, another mystery we lack the capability to solve. Vault dwellers who eventually emerged found a wasteland with no guidance, no support systems, no organization ready to help them integrate. They either died quickly, unable to adapt, or survived by becoming as brutal as everyone else. I've met vault dwellers who became raiders, who became slavers, who became worse than the wasteland itself because they saw what survival required and chose to embrace the darkness. The hub, that trading center in New California, it tried to be a unifying force for the region, tried to create an economy, tried to establish trade routes, tried to build something stable. Without Brotherhood protection, without access to advanced technology, without institutional support, they managed to survive but never thrive. By 2100, they were still just a collection of merchants, constantly under threat, unable to expand their influence beyond a few dozen miles. I worked as a caravan guard for the hub for several years, saw firsthand how every journey was a gamble with death. Raiders who could strike from anywhere, super mutants who viewed us as prey, deathclaws that treated caravans as mobile buffets, and the constant threat of thirst or starvation if something went wrong. We lost 1 in 3 caravans. 1 in 3. In a Brotherhood world with patrols and maintained roads and support structures, that number would be maybe 1 in 50. The loss of technical knowledge became an exponential problem. It's not just that we couldn't build new technology, we couldn't maintain what remained. Weapons that could have lasted centuries with proper care broke down. Within decades, generators that should have powered settlements indefinitely failed because nobody understood their maintenance requirements. Water purifiers, radiation scrubbers, medical equipment, all of it degrading faster than we could learn to preserve it. I became the wasteland's closest thing to an expert on pre-war technology, and my knowledge was laughably inadequate. I could repair basic electronics if I had the parts. I could perform simple maintenance on power armor if I had the tools. I could diagnose common computer problems if the systems weren't too degraded. That's it. That's the sum total of technological expertise in my entire region. The Brotherhood would have had hundreds of scribes with knowledge that made mine look like a child's understanding. The responders in Appalachia, they tried so hard. After Taggarty's Thunder disbanded, the responders attempted to fill the void. Firefighters, police officers, emergency workers, all trying to help rebuild civilization. They established medical clinics, they trained people in basic survival skills, they set up emergency response networks, and they died to the last person because good intentions aren't enough against scorched beasts and the scorched plague. The Brotherhood would have had the firepower and technology to support them. Alone, they were helpless. The Free States in Appalachia, paranoid survivalists who'd prepared for the worst, they survived longer than most. Their bunkers, their supplies, their weapons caches, all of it designed to outlast the apocalypse. But paranoia and preparation can only take you so far. Without allies, without support, without the ability to coordinate with others, they fell one by one. Their bunkers became tombs. Their supplies rusted away unused. Their technology was lost when the last of them died alone and isolated. Deathclaws spread across the continent unchecked. In a Brotherhood world, there would have been systematic campaigns to control their population, to identify their territories, to establish safe zones. In mine, they're the apex predator of the wasteland, and humans are just another source of meat. I've seen entire settlements abandoned because a pack of Deathclaws moved into the area. I've seen people choose to starve rather than risk foraging in Deathclaw territory. I've seen the bodies. If you had to choose between dying from starvation or risking death by Deathclaw to get food, which would you choose? The wasteland forces that decision daily. The loss of hope was perhaps the worst casualty. In a world with the Brotherhood, even if you disagreed with their methods or their philosophy, you could look at them and know that someone was trying. Someone was preserving knowledge, fighting threats, working toward a future. In my world, there was no tomorrow. There was only today, only survival, only the endless struggle to make it through one more day in a world that wanted you dead. Children grew up without education, without knowledge of what the world had been or what it could be again. I've met 15-year-olds who thought holotapes were naturally occurring rocks with voices trapped inside. I've met adults who didn't know the world was once different, who thought the wasteland was natural, who had no concept that things could be better. That ignorance, that loss of historical memory, it guaranteed we'd never recover. The communications networks that the Brotherhood maintained in other timelines linking the chapters across the continent, sharing information and coordinating responses, none of that existed. Every community operated in complete isolation. A solution to a problem discovered in California would be unknown in Nevada, would be unheard of in the Mojave, would be non-existent in the capital Wasteland. We reinvented solutions constantly, wasted resources constantly, failed constantly because we couldn't learn from each other. I'm 72 years old now, and I know I'm dying. Radiation sickness finally caught up with me. The Enclave's genetic purge didn't kill me, but decades of wasteland exposure are finishing the job. I have maybe a year left, probably less, and when I die, the knowledge I've spent my life accumulating dies with me. There's no one to pass it to, no institution to receive my archives, no chain of learning to preserve what I've discovered. That's what the absence of the Brotherhood of Steel truly means. It's not just the lost battles or the scattered technology or the failed settlements. It's the loss of continuity, of institutional memory, of the idea that knowledge can outlive individuals. It's the death of the future, one person at a time, until there's nothing left but survival and forgetting. I've tried to train successors, found young people with intelligence and curiosity, tried to teach them what I know. Some learned the basics, understood simple repair and maintenance. None grasped the deeper principles, the systematic thinking, the scientific method. They wanted quick solutions to immediate problems, not understanding that real knowledge requires years of study and practice. I don't blame them. The wasteland doesn't give you years. It gives you today and demands you fight for tomorrow. The Mojave region saw the rise of the tunnelers in the divide, creatures that should have been contained and studied, that the Brotherhood would have documented and warned others about. Instead, they spread in the darkness, growing in numbers, emerging to hunt at night. Whole areas of the Mojave became no-go zones after sunset, territory that humanity had to cede to monsters we barely understood. The Sierra Army Depot, that legendary military storage facility, became the site of several small wars, factions fighting for control, none of them able to actually access the technology inside. The security systems were still active, still lethal, still following programming from before the bombs fell. I have records of at least 7 major attempts to breach the depot, each resulting in dozens of deaths. The Brotherhood would have had the expertise to disable the defenses, secure the facility, recover the weapons and technology safely. We just had corpses and failure. The think tank, those scientists at Big Met who'd uploaded their brains into machines and gone insane with isolation, they continued their experiments unopposed for centuries. In another timeline, the Brotherhood might have discovered them, might have put an end to their madness or at least limited its damage. In mine, they're still there, still conducting horrific research, still abducting wastelanders for their experiments, still completely beyond any kind of accountability or restraint. I met someone who escaped from Big Moss. Took me 3 days to convince them to tell me about it, and then another week before they could speak about it without screaming. The think tank had replaced their spine with some kind of artificial version, had removed their brain temporarily to run tests, had put it back wrong so they had migraines that made them contemplate suicide daily. That was one victim, one story, out of who knows how many over the centuries. The divide, that region torn apart by nuclear weapons during a courier's delivery, it became a wasteland within the wasteland. Radiation storms marked men, tunnelers, and enough ordnance to level a city. The Brotherhood, in their systematic way, would have quarantined it, mapped it, eventually reclaimed it. In my timeline, it's just a death zone we root around, losing valuable trade connections and territory because we lack the capability to address it. Imagine losing entire regions of the country, not to enemy action, but simply to complexity, to problems we can't solve because we lack the knowledge and tools. That's the world without the Brotherhood. Elder Lions, who in another timeline would have led the Capital Wasteland chapter in a humanitarian direction, who would have supported Project Purity and fought the Enclave, who would have brought clean water to millions. He never existed as a Brotherhood elder. He might have been a soldier somewhere, might have died in the bombs, might have lived as a wastelander. I don't know, but his vision of the Brotherhood as protectors and helpers, as more than just technology hoarders, that never manifested in our reality. Sarah Lyons, who would have become a legendary warrior, who would have led the charge to reclaim Project Purity, who would have inspired a generation of Brotherhood recruits, she never got that chance. The Lions' pride never formed. Their heroism, their sacrifice, their example, all lost to an alternate timeline where the Brotherhood existed to give them purpose. Arthur Maxson, descendant of Roger Maxson, who would have united the Eastern Brotherhood and led them to the Commonwealth, who would have built the Pridwin and taken the fight to the Institute, he probably exists somewhere in my timeline. Probably a wastelander, or dead, or maybe even an Institute synth by now. The weight of legacy that would have shaped him into a leader, the Brotherhood's careful nurturing of their founder's bloodline, none of that happened. Another potential hero lost to circumstance, the Appalachian Expedition, the Brotherhood forces that would have eventually arrived to reinforce and rebuild Taggarty's chapter, they never came. The infrastructure to organize such an expedition didn't exist. The communication networks to coordinate it were never built. The imperative to reclaim and document lost chapters was never established. Appalachia stayed dead. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video, the only way I know these words reached someone before they disappear into the silence. The medical advances the Brotherhood would have achieved through their research and technology preservation, we lost all of it. Stimpaks became rare treasures instead of standard medical supplies. Runaway became mythical instead of accessible. Medical knowledge regressed to pre-modern standards, to bloodletting and prayer and hope. I've watched people die from infections that antibiotics could have cured in days. I've watched children suffer from radiation sickness that Runaway could have prevented. I've watched the slow decay of human health as we forgot how to heal ourselves. The vertebrate fleet that the Brotherhood would have maintained and operated, that symbol of their power projection and mobility, it never existed beyond scattered wrecks. The ability to rapidly deploy forces, to conduct aerial reconnaissance, to evacuate wounded from hostile territory, to transport supplies over dangerous ground, all lost. We were confined to walking speed, to the limitations of Brahmin and caravans, to the brutal calculus of what you could carry versus what you needed to survive. I'm recording this from my final position, the old Vault-Tec monitoring station I mentioned at the beginning. I've gathered everything I've learned, every document I've preserved, every observation I've made, and I'm uploading it to a network that probably doesn't work anymore, broadcasting on frequencies that nobody monitors, hoping against hope that someone somewhere might receive this transmission and learn from it. The tragedy isn't just what we lost. The tragedy is that we lost it unnecessarily. One man, Captain Roger Maxson, his survival at Mariposa would have changed everything. His moral courage, his refusal to accept atrocity, his vision of a better future, all of it could have been the seed from which humanity's recovery grew. Instead, he died in the collapse of Mariposa, and we've been dying slowly ever since. I think about him sometimes, this man I never met, whose voice I only heard once over a crackling radio transmission. I think about the moment he decided to stand up, to say no, to risk everything for what was right. I think about how that single moment of conscience could have saved millions of lives across generations. And I think about all the moments like that we miss, all the potential turning points where history could bend toward hope instead of despair. The Wasteland didn't have to be this way. We could have rebuilt. We could have preserved knowledge, could have protected technology, could have established order from chaos. We had the tools. We had the potential. We had the opportunity. What we didn't have was organization, was continuity, was the Brotherhood of Steel. This is my last testament, my final confession. I am the archivist, keeper of knowledge that will die with me, witness to a timeline that chose darkness through the simple absence of light. I've spent 72 years documenting our failure, chronicling our decline, recording the slow death of human civilization in a world without the Brotherhood of Steel. To whoever finds this, if anyone does, know that it didn't have to be this way. Know that we were capable of better, that we had the potential for recovery, that we failed not through lack of resources, but through lack of organization. Know that the Brotherhood of Steel, for all their flaws and contradictions in other timelines, represented something essential, the idea that knowledge should outlive individuals, that some things are worth preserving even in the darkest times, that humanity's future matters more than today's survival. I'm closing this transmission now. My hands are too unsteady to continue. My vision too blurred from the radiation sickness. I've said what I needed to say, documented what I needed to document. The archive is complete. such as it is. Whether anyone ever reads it, whether it makes any difference, I'll never know. But I had to try, because that's what humans do, even in the Wasteland. Even when hope is dead and the future is dark, we try, we record, we remember, we bear witness to what was lost, even if we can't reclaim it. Captain Roger Maxson, Elizabeth Taggarty, Elder Lyons, Sarah Lyons, all the Brotherhood members across all the timelines where they existed and made a difference. This is for you. This is the story of the world you never saved because you never got the chance to exist. The Brotherhood of Steel, ad victoriam, to victory, even if that victory never came.